We are going to get this wrapped up. I know everybody in here is extremely tired, so we don't want to. We're not going to keep you longer than we have to. What I want to do is just start off by introducing myself. My name is Derek Bartlett. I am the Director of Business Development for Sustainable Solutions, and I have the privilege of traveling all over the country. Pastor Dave asked me earlier. He said, how often do you fly? I was like, I really don't know how often I fly. I said, I just know that, I will have flown about 75,000 miles this year. And he's like, are you serious? And so, but I'm like, I guess I'm young enough to love it. Eric told me it's about to kill him. But I still like it. I still like traveling all over the country. And I get to work with clients and churches. They all look different. I work with real traditional churches. I work with non-denominational churches. And it's exciting. I always like to start by just going ahead and getting something out of the way. I am young, but I'm not near as young as I look. Okay, so I've been working on this shadow for about 3 days just to look a little bit older for you. But I'm 36 years old. I've been married for 14 years, and I have 3 kids, 10, 8, and 4. I've spent half of my professional life in full-time ministry, and I have spent the other half in secular business. I've always had this passion, this love for business, and I've always had a passion for ministry. And I struggled with that for a lot of years because I didn't really know what God wanted me to do. And so it's been a process of God getting me to where He has me today, where I get to work with churches from a business aspect. So now I'm doing ministry and business together. And so I'm so thankful for where God has brought me to this point. Even my education is all over the place. I basically had no clue what to do when I went to college for the first time, which is basically anybody who ever goes to college. And so all I knew was I don't want to take any math. So I got a degree in biology and have never used it. But it did give me what I needed to be able to go back and get my master's degree in Christian ministry. And then when I realized God was not really calling me to full-time ministry, I went back and finished my MBA. So I've learned a lot in my lifetime, and I'm finally at a place where I feel like I'm putting some of it together. Not necessarily biology, but the rest of it works. So anyways, it's really good to be with you guys today. And so I just want to kind of wrap all of this up. So what is all of this about? The first session we talked about was how our work is our worship, and how God has given us so many different responsibilities and so many different resources in this life. And it's really easy to get distracted. It's really easy to get caught up in the everyday life, the clocking in, the clocking out, the taking care of our home, the taking care of children, all of this stuff, which is very important, and it's a responsibility God gives us. But a lot of times what happens is we just chalk it up as life, and we forget that it's actually it's an opportunity every day that God has given us to do those things. And so it's important for us to understand that we need to do all of those things for His glory. And so that's that first part of it. The second part is with our resources is that, we need to navigate every opportunity possible to make sure that we expand the resources that God has given us. And a lot of times, what ends up happening is, do I hear music?
It's coming through the speakers.
It's like classical music, like opera something, or I don't know. It's like weird. It's like I got like angels singing behind me. I'm like, God? Okay. No, it's really not that big of a deal.
Turn it back on before you finish it.
Okay. All right. Absolutely. Okay. Just want to make sure I wasn't losing my mind there. It's been a long weekend. So anyways, yeah, so it's important that we understand that there are tools out there. And I truthfully believe that God has given us people like G.A. Reppel who are smarter than we are in a certain area to be able to be creative and help us to know how to maximize our resources. And that's all we really want to do in this. And so Eric was like, did I confuse everybody? I was like, I don't think so. It's all confusing anyways. And so the most important thing is that you get with a G.A. Reppel representative, let them talk you through it. They're not going to walk through everything right there. They're going to listen to who you are, what you have, and what your heart is, and they'll tailor fit something specifically for you. But the whole idea of all of this is that we have to steward the things that God has given us, and that includes the church. And God has given us the opportunity to be a part of His church. his body. And every single one of us in here has been given that opportunity for a reason. And for you guys in here is to be a part of Grace Church. God has you here for a specific reason. And so we can't take that lightly. So many people in churches want to come in and they want to be a part of the church on Sunday, but then that's it. They take the worship, they enjoy the worship. It is a great time to praise God and everything that he's done for us, to hear about God's word, and then we walk away. And we don't do anything else with that the rest of the week. And that's not the way that Jesus intended the church to be. Jesus intended the church to grow the kingdom outside of these walls, to actually walk next door for once and say hello to our neighbor and introduce ourselves and with the intent to make sure that they know Jesus. And so I want to start by asking you a simple question, but very important question. If your church closed their doors today, would people notice? And I'm not talking about people within this church. Of course they're going to notice because they're going to show up on Sunday and they can't get in. And of course churches around here are going to notice because all of a sudden they're going to have this influx of people that didn't used to go to their church. But would the community of Dallas notice? My personal opinion of what I know from this church is the answer is yes. You know, I think that you guys are doing a great job at growing this church. You have a lot of energy in your services. You're attracting young families. Everything that you're doing with the preschool and the kindergarten. I mean, you're meeting a real need for families in this community. It's one of the top needs we see all across the country. And churches have the facilities to do this. And so many churches are afraid of it or against it. And you guys have stepped into that faithfully, and you're meeting the needs of people in church. So if you close your doors and that closes, families are going to feel it. So I do believe the answer to this is yes, people will notice it. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't give us the right to settle down and say, okay, well, we're doing something, so that's good enough. We have to constantly reevaluate ourselves as a ministry and as a church to say, what is next? I mean, the simple thing about church throughout all of history has been what? It changes. Does church look the same today as it did in Acts? It doesn't. It doesn't look anything like it did in the book of Acts. Does it look the same that it did 200 years ago? Thank God. Does it look the same that it did even, like she said, 10 years ago? Church looks different. But one thing is also consistent about the way the church has grown throughout these changes is that it's simply that. It's grown. The church has thrived through some of the toughest places. And change has shown itself to be good. What has happened over the past, let's just say, 100 years or so is that the church has become extremely internally focused. All right, so we're focused more on what's happening inside the walls than what's going on outside the walls. We're more concerned with what we're getting out of worship services and what we're getting out of the church than we are about how the church is changing the kingdom outside of these walls. And so, because the church has become so internally focused, we begin to it's almost like an idolatry of relationships. It becomes more important what's happening inside here than what's happening outside. And it's the exact opposite of the way that Jesus lived his life. You see, past generations have thought so differently about church. I mean, when you look at some of these words, these are words that are all, there's nothing wrong with these words, okay? But this is the way that the older generations see church. They see, they think about baptism, they think about the New Testament, Old Testament doctrine. They think about things They think about things like, not baptism, but like the Lord's Supper. And they understand all of these things at a much deeper level. Okay, so younger generations, they don't necessarily understand the depth of what Scripture teaches the way that our older generations do. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing that older generations understand it more than the younger generations. That's obvious. That's going to happen. All right? But now we have this younger generation that's coming up, okay? These younger generations, and they see church totally different. Or they think that church should be totally different. I mean, millennials see things like like seeking. Seeking is a word that kind of came out of the millennial generation. And the reason for this was because older generations were okay with everything that was happening inside the church. It was consistent. It was safe. It felt the same. There wasn't a lot of change. And so, but millennials, they want to know why. Why is like the greatest question they have. So it's not just good enough to say homosexuality is wrong. They're not done there. They want to know why. Well, where does the Bible say that? And why would God feel that way? So they want to dive in. And what happens to older generations, or we'll just say even the traditional churches, that topic scares them to death. But what we have to understand is that they're learning from every other institute across the country that those things are okay. So they're hearing in school, as early as middle school. They're hearing in high school, in college. They're hearing it from social media. They're hearing it on the news. They're seeing all the protests across the country. And what they're seeing is that this stuff should be okay. Why is it wrong to love who you want to love? So they're not good enough with just gaining a bunch of information. They want to know why. They want to seek out more answers. They're a generation that is more socially conscious. They want to be involved. They want to be involved in stuff. They want to see that the church is changing things. But the church, the one consistent that Eric and I see all over the country, is that the church does not want to change. They fight themselves literally to death. We see church splits over some of the dumbest stuff, like carpet or seating. And I understand like changes in worship can even be hard for churches, but it's growing the church with younger generations. And so what we have to step back and look at is, okay, maybe it's not my cup of tea, but if it's drawing them into a place where they can experience Jesus, then what are we fighting against? The fighting that happens inside the church is probably the number one tool from the enemy who wants to destroy the church. What he's doing is he's stepping back and saying, I'll just let them have at it. And so a church that refuses to change will eventually die. See, for all of us, the primary responsibility of every generation of church leaders is to hand their faith in the church off to the next generation. We're actually right in the middle of this happening. This is happening now. It's not getting ready to happen. We're in the process of it. 65 to 75% of pastors across the country right now are under the age of 40. All right? The church is growing, but it's growing differently. And so we have to be serious when it comes to this topic. And what we need is the older generation to come alongside the newer generation and prepare the church. Because what will happen is that we'll have a bunch of people that are leading the church that have no idea what they're doing. God knows what they'll be teaching each other. And so we have to take this responsibility seriously. It's not just about our finances. It's not about, okay, God, you've given me a lot of finances, and now I have to prepare so that I can hand those finances off in a responsible way and in a way that grows the kingdom. It's not just about the finances. It's not just about the fact that maybe some of you have taught Sunday school for a very long time. God loves that. He called you to do that. But he's also not done with you yet. And so we have to realize that it's our responsibility as a church to prepare the next generation. You think about Timothy and Paul. Think about Timothy and Paul, okay? Paul is, especially by the time he writes these books, Paul's older, all right? But Paul was already a no-nonsense guy. You know, he had a vision and he had a mission and he was getting after it. I mean, he was reaching people with the gospel. He was upsetting people, but man, if you got in his way, he's going to run over you as long as it meant somebody heard about Jesus. But what he did was he took this kid alongside him named Timothy, And you can imagine Timothy being as young as he is, even though it seems to me like when you read about Timothy, a pretty responsible kid, but a sponge, obviously. But what happens? Like at this time right here, Paul's in prison. He's nearing the end of not just his ministry, but his life. And so Paul realizes it is time. Like Paul's been holding the baton, and now it's time to pass it off to Timothy. And when I read these letters to Timothy, the one consistent I see is that Timothy had a problem with fear. Timothy was nervous. He was scared. He didn't feel like he was fully prepared. But Paul poured into him and helped him for this moment. And look what he says to Timothy. He says, "The things that you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others." So Paul had people who poured into him, and then he poured into Timothy. And now he's telling Timothy, you got to get ready, and you got to start teaching people who are also going to be qualified so that they can tell other people about this same stuff. I mean, Timothy sat through message after message, some of them probably extremely long, some of them extremely boring, some of them awesome, but all of it used by God to prepare him for what was next. It's funny. So I've never done this part right here before, but I'm going to do it today, okay? Normally what I say right here is, so who are these dang millennials? All right? By the way, I'm a millennial, and I have a group right here, and I was feeling your pain when they're going through that last session, and they're all talking about like millions of dollars or like $500,000, and we all have like $5. It's like, so what do we do? Well, look, you're not off the hook, okay? So this part of it is definitely for you. It's for both generations. I'm not here to beat up older generations, and we get beat up enough, okay? So I'm not here to beat you up either. What I'm here to talk about is how do we all see what our responsibility is for preparing the church for the next generation, and what are we going to do about that, okay? But this is no lie. So I'm sitting back there, and I'm on Twitter, because I've heard Eric teach this same message 482 times. So I'm on Twitter, and I'm a fantasy football guy, all right? So I'm just flipping through Twitter, and this is no lie, all right? So I'll give you an update, because some of you guys might be football fans, and you haven't been able to watch. It's been a brutal day for kickers. Kickers have missed everything. And yes, the Browns lost again because they missed a field goal at the very end. And so they haven't won a game in like 2 years. And so there's this whole thing that's going on Twitter about these kickers that are missing all these field goals. Well, the problem is all these kickers are like rookies. They're very young. And so Yahoo Fantasy Sports literally tweeted, "Dang millennials, now they're ruining special teams." I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm like, it's gone too far, all right? You're blaming us for everything. So anyway, so who are these millennials, okay? Quickly, millennials, most people think that generations are about ages. They are some, but the majority of it is really more about the way that they think, the way that they act, the things that they have, like where their values are at, the things that they think are important. So those are the types of things that actually qualify somebody to be in an age group. But in a generation, the name of a generation. But for just today, what we'll say is basically a millennial is anyone who was born somewhere right around 1980 to the mid-90s to 2000. So we're somewhere right around in there is what people are saying are millennials. So for some reason, people get really upset when I say this, because honestly, if you go and you research it, it's actually 1978. And that group between 1978 and 1982, they always want to fight with me. I'm not a millennial. And I'm like, dude, it's just a title, okay? It doesn't mean I'm not a millennial. All right, well, you're not a millennial, okay? No reason to fight about this thing. It's not like it's a 4-letter word, okay? It's longer than 4. Yeah, it is. All right, so who are the millennials? One of the things about millennials are that we carry a bad rap, and people think that we're dumb, but we're not, okay? Right now, we're the largest generation in the U.S. representing over 1/3 of the population. Okay, so we are 33% of the United States. Okay, so we are a large part of the population. We are the most diverse and educated generation to date. Okay, we are not dumb. Okay, we just don't know what to do with our knowledge. And we're working on it, okay? But hey, let's be honest. Who in their 20s really did know what they were doing, okay? We all have to go through that maturing stage. So, but we're educated, so you can't call us dumb. We will make up as much as 75% of the workforce by 2025. That's 7 years, less than 7 years. So in less than 7 years, we will make up 3/4 of the workforce in the United States. We account for over $1 trillion in consumer spending. We like to spend money. We like to spend mommy and daddy's money. But we like to spend money, okay? That's not a bad thing. It's going to make for a great economy. And then later on in life, a broken economy. Almost 90% indicate that they would be more likely to purchase products from a company that supports solutions to social issues. Okay, so those things are important to millennials. We're going to buy if we think that it's going to do something. Has anybody heard of the shoe Toms? I mean, Toms exploded. Why? Because when you bought a pair of Toms, it put a pair of Toms on someone else who needed shoes. And so that's why it exploded. Let's be honest, those are the ugliest shoes ever. Okay, Toms are ugly. But because it was a social issue, it exploded with millennials. Nearly 65% would rather make less money at a job that they love as compared to making more money at a job that they find boring. So a millennial, yes, they know the importance of making money and they want to make money, but if it's a boring job, they're not going to do it. This is the exact opposite of older generations. They would work at the same job for 65 years, even if they hated it. It could be a laborious job that is breaking their feet and their legs, and they're going to stick with it. Why? Well, they were loyal to that job. They saw it differently. But millennials are not going to do that. I'm an example of this, okay? And I'm okay with this. I have never really stayed at a job for longer than 4 years.
Now you tell me.
You got 3 years left. I've only been here for a year. So I've never really been in a job for more than 4 years, and let me tell you why, okay? It's not because I hated the job. It's because I got to a place in that job where I felt like it was no longer making a difference. I was no longer doing anything that really impacted anybody's life. And that's why I think that this is going to be a job that I stick with for a very long time. Because I'm getting to interact with churches all over the country consistently. I'm helping them be able to think through, how do you develop your property? How do you move this project forward? How are you going to finance this project? I mean, it's a fun job, and it's advancing the kingdom at the same time. Keeps me on my toes. That's a good thing. Nearly 65% would prefer to work for employers that take action on social and ethical causes that they care about. Again, socially conscious. Now, I was asked by a gentleman in this church. He said, I don't really buy that. He's like, I don't really buy that millennials are really socially conscious. I was like, well, that's not true. They are. They're actually very socially conscious. Now, they don't know what to do with that, okay? Because, for instance, a lot of millennials don't have any money. So to be able to fund social issues, they can't really do it. And they don't really know what, so they don't, but they're very socially conscious. They want to be a part of that. And companies all over the country, really all over the world, are figuring this out. And so how do they attract the top talent? They offer stuff that affects social causes. So basically what they'll say is, you come to work for us because we are going to advance this or that. We're going to take care of the, we're going to help produce clean air. We're going to help, all of these different things. If you take a part of your paycheck and it goes towards this social cause, we'll match that. That's the way that they attract millennials, because millennials want to make a difference. The wiring inside of a millennial is this. They want to change the world. Okay? Now again, they're young. They don't have all the resources for it. They don't have all the wisdom that's needed to make that happen. But they want to be world changers. So what better entity in the entire world for them to be a part of than the church? It's an amazing opportunity for the church. We just have to figure out how we capture them. By 2030, millennials will outnumber boomers by 22 million. Did I hear sweet? That's awesome. That is the first time I've ever had a response like that. Most people gasp. I'm heading home. Time for them to deal with the world. Over the next 40 years, baby boomers will transfer, and this number fluctuates, $41 to $59 trillion of assets to millennials. Okay? Over the next 40 years. Now, that is a lot of money. And here's the thing. You can't stop that from happening. All right? It's going to happen. But how it's transferred and where that money goes, that's why we have to be responsible with how we prepare them now. So the transfer is happening. We're right in the middle of it. It's already what? It's already like $14 trillion has already been transferred, okay? So we're already in the middle of this transfer. So now we have to prepare them to make sure that they understand how to be responsible with that and how to use it to advance the kingdom. So what do millennials think about the church? 1 in 4 say that they can't think of a single positive contribution to society made by Christians or the church in their lifetime. Now, some of this is just them blowing smoke. All right? But some of it, honestly, I've said the same thing. And I've been a part of the church since before I can even remember. I grew up not only in church, but I grew up in a Christian home. I went all the way through from K4, which I don't even know sure if that's a thing, all the way through 12th grade was in Christian school. My dad was a professor on a Bible college, and so I spent the first 10 or 11 years of my life on a campus of a Bible college. Didn't even know a world existed outside of that. And when I got outside of it, I really came up through the church. As I got to my college years, I really started to get frustrated because I realized that our church had a lot of people, it had a lot of resources, and yet we weren't doing anything with that outside of our church building. Everything was focused on the inside, and I'm like, well, but like Jesus was so against that. You know, he pushed back so hard on that insider mentality. And so this is what millennials see, is they are seeing that there's a difference between the way the church has acted over the past couple hundred years and what the Bible teaches the church should look like. And so when they look at it, they say, well, I don't see them really making a difference. 3 out of 10 millennials say that church is not at all important, while an additional 4 in 10 feel ambivalent, saying that church is either somewhat important or somewhat not important. So basically, 50 to 75% of millennials are just kind of like this about church. Like, I might go if my friends go or whatever, but I might go check this one out. I've heard that this place offers some cool worship or something like that. But they're not really that excited about church. Over half of all millennials are unchurched, and those left are leaving the church at an alarming rate of over 1,000 per day. So why are so many young people leaving the church? Take a watch for this video. You good? Can y'all hear that? Okay.
You might have noticed that here in America, there's one group that's not nearly as involved or engaged in the church as other age groups, 18 to 29-year-olds. We call this generation the Mosaics. And for most churches, this is a demographic black hole. Just how big of a black hole? Get this. 59% of Mosaics with a Christian background drop out of church after attending regularly as a teenager. Now, on the surface, this doesn't seem like a new problem. And in some respects, it isn't. People in this age group have left the church in droves for decades, but historically, many come back. If you think that's going to happen with today's generation, think again. Today's young adults are very different from their counterparts of the past. A lot of them are rethinking the major things in life. Stuff like whether or not marriage is still necessary, or if the church really matters. What's strange is, the majority of these dropouts actually still consider themselves Christians. They're big fans of Jesus, just not the church. Every Mosaic has their own unique reason for leaving the church. But ultimately, they all point their fingers at the Christian community. And what they're saying is, you lost me. Now, hold on. You lost me? Isn't that a little harsh? Well, maybe. But what a person really means when they say that to someone is, you're not making sense to me. Research from our team at Barna shows that millions of Mosaics don't feel like they can ask their most pressing life questions in church. So it's no wonder they turn to technology, pop culture, and their peers for answers. With all of the resources on the internet, young people have access to answers to lots of things, important and trivial. And some of the answers seem to make sense. But just because something makes sense, it doesn't mean it's the truth. Naturally, all that conflicting information leads to more questions and more confusion. These wandering souls are viewing the world through a distorted lens. They need the wisdom of the church to help them see things through the lens of faith. But they can't even see that. What we need is real dialogue and real answers to the questions that all too often just get swept under the rug. It means we stop ignoring the elephant in the room, roll up our sleeves, and seriously address the tough questions about science, sexuality, culture, and lifestyle. Let's be careful not to judge them too quickly and give our young Christians the tools they need to cope with the modern world. We need to teach them to be discerning in today's culture, to be influential among their peers as followers of Christ. Today's changing world is a tough place to live faithfully as a Christian at any age. But if we're gonna change the world together, we can't afford to let another young person say, "You lost me."
So what should we know about the future of the church? One is that the potential to gain is still greater than the potential to lose. All right, so it's not all gloom and doom. The church is not dead, okay? The church is still it's still growing, it's still thriving, but it is changing. And so, I mean, is the population of the world, has it increased or has it decreased? And it will increase tomorrow, and then it will increase the next day. Okay, so population is going up, which means that the ability to grow the church increases every day. But what we have to do as a church is we have to have a real strategy behind how do we reach them. Now, I think it's important to clarify here that I'm not saying that everybody in this church, especially older generation, I'm not saying that you have to go into downtown Portland, go find the next millennial that you see and grab them and just try to get them into the church. That probably isn't going to work out real well. What I am going to say is, how are we equipping the ones that are around us in our daily lives in order to grow the church? For instance, we have a whole table right here of young people. All right? It's not enough, and I don't even know what ministries you have here, but it's not enough if there's a college ministry or a young adults ministry. Okay? What we need is we need the wisest generations in the church to say, how am I going to be a part of equipping them? And so as an example, there was an older lady at a church that I went to, and she's like, I did this. And I was like, you did? She's like, yeah, I did this. I was like, well, what did you do? She's like, well, I went to the college pastor. This was a long time ago, okay? This was before she ever even heard this. She's like, I went to the college pastor, and I was like, I gotta get involved somehow. I don't really know what to do. All I know is young people like to eat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a Tuesday night, I'm going to make this huge pot of spaghetti, and I'm just going to have it there. All right, so if you'll just tell all your college students or whatever, it's not a Bible study, it's nothing like that. They don't even have to talk to me. But I'm going to have spaghetti, and my house will be open. So if no one shows up, I'll eat spaghetti for the next 5 months. But maybe they will, okay? And so slowly what she did was she set this routine where every Tuesday night her house was completely open. And she would just cook. And they could come and they could do whatever they wanted. They could play games. They could just hang out. A lot of them probably were just staring at their phone. But they were there and they were together. And eventually they started actually inviting her into this stuff, and so she began to have more like game nights and stuff, and they wanted to be a part of that. It created an opportunity where they could have, like, they would pick like one question and they would just talk about that question all night. And she said she did a lot more listening than she did speaking. And the one thing that we know is that when stuff like that happens, you're going to hear some really weird things. Really weird theology. Basically, it's just going to be heretical. Okay? But it had them in the right environment, in a safe environment where they had people around them that could speak into that situation. They could say, well, listen, this is what the Bible says, okay? So this is just what the Bible says, and it was in a non-threatening way. It was in a you disgust me, get out of my house way. It was really an opportunity for someone to pour into them. I think what we have to do is we have to recapture the ones that have left the church. Okay, so yes, I'm not saying ignore the ones that have never been a part of the church, but if we recapture the ones that have left the church, then what happens is, then they can go out and because they've got friends that have never been a part of the church. It's just like any other generation before. So what we have to do is we have to recapture the ones that have left. And between that and gaining new people in the church, the potential to gain is still the best that it's been in a long time. Churches that love their model more than their mission will die. Now, this is what we see often in more traditional churches. And now, even in like the total swing, where you're in like the ultra non-conservative churches, your very kind of loose liberal churches, is that they've swung the total opposite direction. But it's all about who they are. It's all about what defines them as a church. So, for instance, in older generations, it was, we are Baptist, or we are Methodist, or we are Presbyterian. And so whatever that is known to be is who we are. So you were defined by almost a system. You were defined by what has always been and what they told you that you needed to be. And so we kind of built our churches around those things. So if we offered Awana was a vital part of the foundation of who the church was. I grew up in Awana, and I don't know if you guys even know what Awana is, but I grew up in Awana. It's a children's ministry. You see that in a lot of Baptist churches. And there's a lot that's broken about Awana, but there's a lot that's really good, because the majority of scripture that I know today, I learned when I was in Awana. And that church meant well when I went through that process. The people that were in there, they loved the kids, and they were teaching us for a good reason. They wanted to grow that. But see, all of these things they're part of a model. The mission, what is the mission of the church? It should be the last words that Jesus spoke to us while he was here. It's to go out. It's to tell people about Jesus. It's to make disciples. It's to baptize them. And to make disciples that can make disciples that can make disciples. That should be our mission. We have to be really careful that what is not our mission is what the systems or the ministries that we've created inside our walls. Those are tools. Those are opportunities. They create opportunities. But they're a model. We have to be careful that they don't dominate our mission, because those that are more concerned with their model, those churches are going to die. Consumer Christianity will die, and a more selfless discipleship will emerge. Because here's the thing about younger generations. Again, they want to act. So the idea of writing a big fat check and sending it overseas for mission, that's probably going to go away in these next generations. Because they don't see the reason for sending money over across the seas when they can do it themselves. Now, they don't have the resources right now themselves to do those mission trips or things like that, but they would much rather get a team of people their own age and go make a difference somewhere. So how do we, as generations that have more resources than they do, how do we empower that? How do we say, okay, it's not all about coming here on a Sunday morning and hearing a great message and being a part of great worship and then going home and being like, man, what a great service. And then we leave church at the door until we come back the following Sunday. See, that's a consumer mentality where it's about what we can get from the church, what we get out of it, rather than how it changes us and empowers us to be disciple makers. Sundays will become more about what we give than what we get. So I just moved to Kalispell, Montana, and most of you guys saw me a minute ago. I had a coat on. You guys opened this door, and I almost froze to death. I am in big trouble, okay? This winter is going to be brutal. I live 2 hours from Canada, and I was cold when you opened this door, and it's not even cold outside. So anyways, I just moved to Kalispell, Montana, and so it was kind of refreshing, because for once in a long time, I got to choose a church that I wanted to go to. It wasn't that I don't love my old church that I worked for or anything like that. It's just that for so long I worked in ministry, and so there was a reason I had to be at that church. So now we're in this new place, and we're going around to different churches, and so we go to this really large church in Kalispell, Montana, and I picked a big church because I could kind of blend in for a couple weeks. And so I walk in, we pull up, and it's kind of a campus type deal since it's downtown. So they've got like buildings on corners, and each building has like different parts of the ministry. And so we get out of the car, and this young guy comes running across the street to me, and me and my family, and he introduces himself. I'm going to guess he's probably 28 years old. But again, like, I can't tell because I look like I'm 25 years old and I'm not. But but he's like introducing himself, and he's like, man, I'm so glad that you're here. And there's people walking everywhere. And he introduced himself to my wife. He's like fist bumping my kids, and he's like, hey, let me take you guys up to the kids ministry. So he walks us up. He like helps our kids get checked in. And the person that was checking our kids in on the kids system, she was like 14 years old and awful at it, okay? It took her like, it felt like an eternity just to get the things to print. But you know what? She had an adult that was standing right there with her, and that adult was being so patient. And just, okay, well, this is what you do next, and this is what you do next. And this girl was really trying to help. But I noticed that, and so it was actually kind of cool to me. So I go downstairs, and the people that are handing out the information about the service, they were all like in their 18, 19, 20-year-old. They were all like college students. They're handing this out, just happy to be there. They're like, it's over the top. I mean, it was literally like I wanted to look at them and be like, it is morning. You should not be this happy, all right? Just, you got to stop. You got to calm down a little bit. But they're like handing all this stuff out, and they're wearing shirts that are like, we love to serve, and like there's signs out in front of the church like, this is a happy place. Come be happy with us, and I mean, like that kind of stuff. And so I'm walking in, and I go and I sit down in the worship service, and I look up on stage, and everybody's like under the age of 25. Okay, the oldest person on that staff or in that church, I think, was the pastor, and he was probably around 40 years old, and so everyone leading worship is like under the age of 25. I'm pretty sure that 2 of the girls that were helping lead worship were like in their student ministry, and I began to think about it. And I'm like, see, this is what it's all about to the younger generation. They're not going to just attend church and sit in a pew and mark off, like check it off as if I went to church this week. They want to do something. They want to do something there. And what they need is they need to be invited into that. They need a church that says, hey, listen, it's okay that you don't know what you don't know. But here's an opportunity. If you want to do this, we'll teach you. We'll help you. We want to empower you to do these things. I saw some of that today. You guys have people in your worship team that are young. And so that should be something that is celebrated. You guys should be really excited about that. But it should also show you that, like especially the young generation that are still in the church, like let's empower them to take charge of something. Give them that opportunity. Attendance will no longer be driven by engagement. Engagement will drive attendance. And this is the way that it should be. See, if you're in a church that when you look around every Sunday, you see the same faces, then that church has a problem. Because what should be happening is that you should be looking around the church, and every week you should be seeing new faces. Because what we should be doing is we should be engaging people outside of the church, and that engagement should then drive attendance within our church. So instead of walking into the same coffee shop every week and getting our coffee and not talking to the barista, let's have a conversation with that barista and just see if there's a possibility that they'd want to come to church. And so, those things are really, really important that we understand that younger generations, they thrive around community. They want to be in smaller groups of people that think like they do and dress like they do and walk like they, and we may not understand all of those things. But that's what they want, and they want that opportunity. And the church has every thing that it needs in order to provide that opportunity. In 2050, 70% of the total world population will be urban. So younger generations are moving back into the city, where older generations moved outside of the city, and we built our housing developments and stuff like that. Nothing wrong with those things, but that was kind of what we did, was we went outside of the city. Younger generations are moving back into the city. They want to be able to walk to everything that they need to get to. Part of that's because they don't have cars, but they want to be able to walk. Like they would prefer to walk downstairs, get a piece of pizza, and then walk back upstairs and be in their bedroom. I mean, those are the types of things that they're looking for. Okay, they want to look out their window and see busy streets with life and people walking around. And the reason for that is because they want community. One of the things that Eric and I see all across the country is that old downtown is back to life again. Where it used to be, it was when a lot of you guys were a lot younger, downtown was it. And then when you guys, when these older generations started building these subdivisions and the housing outside of the city, old downtowns died all over the place. Businesses left. There was nothing there. But now what do you see? When you go back into the city, it's popping again, right? And it's not just like your Applebee's and that kind of stuff. All those places are dying. It's the things that are local. It's all about experience. It's all about those types of things are extremely important. So when we ask questions about, well, why would it matter what the entryway of our church looks like? Because it matters to the younger generation. And we don't necessarily have to understand that. We just need to know that what it does is it creates a bigger atmosphere for them to connect, for them to be able to have those conversations instead of getting smacked into each other and spilling coffee on themselves. I mean, third-degree burns are not fun, okay? And so if it's a building, if it's additions to a building or making it look different, if those are the things that are going to make younger generations come back to church, then what are we fighting about? Just do it. Let's get them back into church. Because the church moving into the future and advancing the kingdom is way more important than what our foyer looks like. Future church buildings will be community centers that meet practical needs of families and individuals 7 days a week. This church, of all churches, should know this. You're doing this with the children's stuff throughout the week. But instead of just saying, okay, we've done this, what else can you do? God has blessed you with a lot of building and a lot of property. I mean, when you think about it, what you have today did not exist when this church was planted. Okay? There have been additions and additions and additions and changes all along the way. And I promise you that in the midst of those changes, there were people who fought it. But look what it's done for you today. And now you're a part of it. So the people who funded those things, the people who helped make those things happen, they prepared what you have today so that when you walked in, you had a place to worship. And we need to make sure that we do everything that we can with our facilities to get people naturally onto our campus 7 days a week instead of just a couple of hours a week. Real quick, a statistic that we know in our world is that in our world of development and working with churches, there's only one entity in the entire country that uses their facilities less than churches. It's NFL football stadiums. Other than that, churches use their facilities less than any other entity in the world. That is a terrible use of God's money. So how are you going to help prepare the next generation church? Let me stop by saying this. So this is not a beat-up session on older generations. It's hey, let's hit reset in our mind and say, hey, we don't want to just give up. How can I get more involved? Younger generations like yourselves, you guys have to continue to be open. You have to be sponges, and you have to understand, ready or not, the baton's about to be passed to you, and it's your responsibility. So don't kill the church, okay? No pressure. No pressure. How do we do this? First of all, we need to nurture their inner lives. Okay, yeah, they got a lot of really crazy questions, and yeah, they want to know why. They're not good enough with because it's always been that way. They want to know why. So let's just sit down and have that conversation with them. All right, and in a way that's non-threatening, in a way that just says, hey, I like coffee, you like coffee, let's talk. Focus on their potential, not all the bad, okay? Listen, every generation has been terrible at this. Okay, so the generation before you hated you, because that's the way that every generation has always been. So what we have to do is we have to stop that mentality and say, okay, wait a second, I got to give them some grace here. Millennials are in their 20s and their 30s. All right, so there's a lot of maturing that has to happen between their age and where you're at. So we got to give them that, and then we have to help prepare them just like somebody helped prepare you along the way. We have to let them lead and then fail and then lead again and then fail and then lead again. And each time they're going to get a little bit better. They're going to have a little more training. They're going to be a little more refined. Before you know it, they're going to be able to take that ministry and run it themselves. And we see this. Jesus was the perfect picture of that. I mean, Peter, that dude was a disaster, all right? But God let him fail and then lead, and then fail and then lead. Encourage innovation and risk-taking, two things that were bad words in churches I grew up in. Okay, you didn't think outside the box. You didn't think outside the box, and you definitely didn't take any risk. But we got to stop doing that. As a church, we got to be risk-takers. We got to be innovative in the way that we think about ministry, in the way that we reach the lost. We have to think long and short term, and that's both generations. So millennials are really bad about thinking about today, thinking about what's going on in my life right in this moment, and not thinking enough about in the future. You need to balance that. Older generations, you got to do the same thing. You can't think about what has always been or where you're at today. You got to be thinking about, how do I finish well? There's this king in the Old Testament, King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah was an amazing king, very, very good king. His dad was a terrible king. His dad loved sin. He brought all kinds of crazy stuff into the nation of Israel. Sexuality and sin, idolatry, all kinds of stuff his dad brought in. And when King Hezekiah took over, he came in, he loved the Lord, and he wanted to clean all that junk up. And he did. He spent his entire time as a king cleaning the stuff up. And the scripture talks about how the things that he did pleased the Lord. So King Hezekiah, he does a great thing with the nation of Israel. And then, so what happens is that towards the end of his life, he gets sick. And he's going to die. And the prophet Isaiah comes in. And prophet Isaiah says, King, you're going to die. And King Hezekiah is, he's torn up, hits his knees, and he prays like, God, I don't want to die, please. Please have grace. I've got more to do. I don't want to die yet. Before Isaiah can even leave the room, he turns back around and he says, the Lord has heard your prayer and he's answered it. And so he's given you 15 more years. So basically King Hezekiah gets this life extension and obviously he's celebrating. And in that celebration, he makes some dumb choices. He invites a lot of other kings, a lot of other important people together, and he begins to show them everything that the nation of Israel has. He begins to almost flaunt it and say, look at what we have, look at what we have created, look at all this. So in comes the prophet Isaiah, and he's like, King Hezekiah, what are you doing? What have you done? And he says, because of what you've done today, the Lord is going to undo everything that you have done. He's like, everything that you have worked so hard to do for this nation is going to be destroyed because of your actions. And look at his response. King Hezekiah said to Isaiah, the word of the Lord that you have spoken is good. For he thought, why not if there will be peace and security in my days? Guys, what a terrible way to finish. All he was thinking about was himself. He's like, well, listen, it sounds like the nation of Israel's got some bad things coming, but I'll be dead by then. So as long as it stays peaceful while I'm here, everything's good. And I see this in the church all the time. We fight for peace. We fight for no change because it's what's easiest. It's what feels safest. But the church is going to change one way or the other. And so are we going to help the church as it changes to advance the kingdom, or are we going to be a stumbling block for it? Because we're not willing to help the next generation, to usher in the next generation to take over the church. So I just want you to think about where are you at? Where's your heart at right now? Is it about saying, is it about saying, no, I need to redirect my thoughts towards advancing the kingdom. There's something, God's not done with me yet. So how is he going to use you? Maybe you're a person who's just waiting for that opportunity, but you've not spoken up. Go see your pastor. He'll be happy to help you figure that one out. You have this opportunity that's coming up in the next few weeks to respond to God. Don't let it be about you. That's the one thing we see crippled churches all over the place, is that we have people that think that the church is about them. We got to push that aside because that's what the enemy wants us to think. Who does the church belong to? It belongs to God. It's his. This next generation is coming up and he knows it. And we can't stop that from happening. He doesn't want us to. He just wants us to make sure that we're faithful as we hand off that baton. Let me pray for you. God, I'm thankful for how you love us, and I'm thankful for how you take care of us. I'm thankful for this church, thankful for the ministry that they have going on. They're growing. They've got energy. They've got momentum that's moving on into the future. And Father, if this church, if it comes together in all of this, it's going to be an awesome thing to watch in Dallas, Oregon. I pray, Father, that your kingdom will advance here and that nothing can stand in its way. I pray that this church will grow and have to go somewhere else because they can't facilitate all the growth anymore. And so there'll be churches planted and disciples made. And it won't be about us, but it'll all be in your name. We lay all this at your feet. In your name, amen.